I promised to deal with Thomas Hobbes tonight. This is a area that I am kind of an expert in. If I was going to say that I was an expert in anything, it would probably be Hobbes and Locke. I've done a lot of research on classical liberalism, and I've written 3 books on Thomas Hobbes. I wrote a book on comparing Hobbes and Thucydides and looking at Hobbes' translation of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. And then I have a book that deals with Hobbes's Leviathan specifically and takes people through that. And then I wrote a book on Hobbes and honor, and specifically like looking at how kind of Hobbes demolished the concept of honor in favor of more liberal ideas. So Hobbes is somebody I'm very familiar with. I like him in a lot of ways, but I disagree with him profoundly. This is a picture from his book, Leviathan, from the original, although it's set against a different background. But you can see in the sovereign's attire there, all the people, and that was meant to represent the new popular basis of political sovereignty that he hoped to establish through his theory. No longer would it be divine right, and nobility, but it would be sovereignty on a popular basis. There are his dates. And so, as you can see, he lived pretty long, especially for his time. Now, I have been looking at all of these thinkers in the context of this ongoing comparison between ancient and modern thought. And this is inspired by Leo Strauss and Natural Right and History and other books that he wrote. I am a Straussian. I've come a long way, but still I think that the Straussian framework is useful for some things. And so I just wanted to kind of regroup here a little bit first, and talk about that comparison. So from the move between ancient thought, which Strauss conceived, in terms of Plato and Aristotle primarily, okay? And then that was taken up by the Romans. But between ancient and modern thought, the transition, for instance, he looked at human nature and said that, the ancients viewed human nature as naturally social or political. People would not be able to be fully human outside of a full-throated political relationship, a social relationship with each other. And the modern context, the modern period, which starts with Machiavelli, but is really, fully seen with Hobbes, sees humans as not naturally social, but rather either asocial or even antisocial in nature. So there's a big shift that occurs there that really impacts the way modern liberal thinkers see politics. So again, from the transition from a view of justice in the ancient mind as natural and fixed, meaning that there is one true definition of justice, and it has to do with character and with how we organize our own selves and our lives, to an idea of justice as conventional, man-made. That means man-made according to who is in power. And this is Hobbes's point of view for sure. It was really also Machiavelli's, that who is in power dictates what is justice. And so that changes depending upon who is in power and what type of government you have and what times you are living in. So from natural to conventional justice. And then also we see this transition from the ancient perspective of government should be about character formation, about producing a particular kind of person. Like Sparta, aimed to produce this honorable, courageous warrior, right? Some notion of virtue that would be developed in people. Whereas the modern point of view about government, according to Strauss, was as dropping that, and we saw that very clearly with Machiavelli, drop that, assignment of, producing character, good character in people, and just deal with law and order. In the case of Hobbes, there's an emphasis on government as an enforcer, not only of order, but of contracts and at least one right, the right to self-preservation through law and order. So I just wanted to go through that to remind you of that context, to put Hobbes into the proper context. He's a modern thinker, and he follows on Machiavelli, who established the idea that we should have much lower expectations for what we can achieve in a way through government, but they should be very solid expectations. So instead of these lofty expectations of creating really morally good people and a utopian society, instead we should have government that can at least provide order and, stop crime, stop chaos, and create a context in which people can do business with each other. Okay. So Machiavelli first establishes this as, lower expectations for both the prince and the people. The prince doesn't have to be a morally virtuous person. He can just be a shrewd, power broker, but he knows what to do to create the proper context so that people can, obey him and achieve some level of security. Low expectations for the people too, to simply be obedient and productive. And that follows through in Hobbes, that Hobbes is interested in economic productivity as well. Machiavelli broke with the ancients first very explicitly on this issue of character formation. So he blazes the trail, but Hobbes follows that trail. He also established this idea, Machiavelli did, that popular government is best. And he had this idea that the principality could be a popular government, that you could base the power of the prince on the people's consent, the people's support. And this is something that Hobbes also follows. And of course, for Machiavelli, that didn't matter as far as whether it was a principality or a republic. The people were the modern source of power, because he said they could wield the arms that would protect the nation state, that would be more powerful than the older feudal ways of protecting the nation state. Hobbes definitely picks up on that. And Machiavelli said that force is the basis of all governments, and it must be used without regard for some sort of universal absolute sense of justice. It has to be used shrewdly, wisely, to achieve certain purposes. I think Hobbes basically agrees with that as well. So Machiavelli blazes that trail, but Hobbes follows, and Hobbes expands on it. And one of the ways that Hobbes expands on it, he's not completely novel in this regard, but he expands on it, is by expanding on this concept that politics is an arena that creates imperatives to act in certain ways, that the context of the political world creates imperatives that force us to act in certain ways. For Machiavelli, that mainly applied to the prince, who, when he was dealing with all the other princes of the world, had to basically act in a certain way, disregarding morality, or he wouldn't survive. Same thing pretty much goes for Hobbes as well. He acknowledges this, and he applies it to the people as well and says, do you not want to die? Then you should obey. It is an imperative. It's something that you must do if you see your situation clearly. So for Machiavelli and Hobbes, that means government sometimes has to preempt aggression. And we will be looking at the state of nature, but human beings for Hobbes in the state of nature must preempt aggression, or they will not survive. There have to be actions on the part of government that are not very savory, that are not very attractive. But they have to be done. For Machiavelli, this included deception. For Hobbes, it definitely includes just the use of brute totalitarian type force, tyrannical force. All right, so Hobbes expands on Machiavelli by thinking more systematically about the implications of these imperatives, of what they both see as the reality of our situation. And Hobbes does this by creating the, quote, state of nature.